The desert stretched endlessly, its harsh winds whipping sand into the air, creating an almost blinding fog. The sun hung low, casting an unforgiving heat over everything in its path. Amidst this desolate landscape, a small puppy lay abandoned, eyes barely open, frail and fragile. The world seemed to have forgotten it. No sound of laughter, no sign of life, just the relentless desert. But just as the puppy's tiny body began to lose hope, a faint, distant sound broke through the silence. Was it a mirage? Or was help finally arriving? The desert was unforgiving, a vast expanse where the harsh winds cut through the dry air, swirling sand in every direction, and the sun beat down relentlessly, painting the land in a golden hue. In the distance, the horizon seemed to stretch endlessly, offering no refuge or escape. Among this desolate wasteland lay a small, helpless creature, struggling against the crushing forces of nature. Daisy, the tiny puppy, was left to face this barren world alone. Her fur, once soft and vibrant, was now matted and caked with dirt, her tiny body too weak to fight the heat that radiated from the earth beneath her. Her throat burned with thirst, and her little heart pounded wildly in her chest as she tried, with all her might, to lift her head from the sand. The desolation around her was like a weight, pressing her down, telling her that there was no way out. The air seemed to shimmer with heat, and Daisy's fragile limbs refused to move, her body fighting a battle she couldn't win. All she could do was lay there, a small, forgotten speck in the middle of a world that seemed to have abandoned her. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Daisy's strength slowly began to fade. Her breathing grew shallow, and her eyes, once bright with life, seemed to grow dimmer with each passing minute. The sound of the wind, the hum of distant life that might have existed somewhere in the vastness of the desert, seemed so far away, so foreign to her. All she could focus on was the unrelenting heat, the unbearable thirst, and the overwhelming feeling that no one was coming to save her. She was just another casualty of this unforgiving world. But as Daisy's world started to fade into a blur of exhaustion and despair, something unexpected happened. In the distance, a faint sound cut through the silence of the desert. The low rumble of an engine reached her ears, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. Daisy's ears perked up weakly, but she didn't have the strength to lift her head. Her heart skipped a beat, unsure if this was real or just another mirage. The world around her was a haze of heat and exhaustion, but still, the sound persisted. A truck appeared on the horizon, its massive wheels kicking up clouds of dust as it rumbled toward her. The engine growled as the truck's large shadow stretched across the barren earth, blocking the harsh sunlight for just a moment. Daisy's eyes flickered. Could it be? Was someone out there? Or was it just another cruel trick of the desert? The truck came closer, and as it did, the figure of a man became clearer. Michael, a long-haul trucker, had been driving this stretch of desert for years. He knew every mile, every turn, and every patch of road that seemed to stretch on forever without a change in scenery. The desert was a lonely place to work, but it was a job that needed doing. This route had become second nature to him, and the miles passed by almost without thought. But today something felt different. As Michael neared the spot on the side of the road, he noticed a small, almost imperceptible shape lying in the sand. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a speck on the landscape, but as he slowed the truck and took a closer look, his instincts told him otherwise. It was a puppy, barely visible against the harsh backdrop of the desert. Its fur, once soft and full, was now dirty and tangled, clinging to its fragile form. Michael's heart clenched at the sight. What had happened to this poor creature? Why was it here, alone and abandoned? He pulled the truck to a halt, the sound of the engine sputtering to silence as he threw it into park. For a moment, Michael just stared. The puppy's small, frail body lay motionless in the sand, its eyes barely open, its breathing shallow. His gut twisted. The world had been so cruel to this animal, leaving it to die in a place where nothing could survive. How could anyone do this? How could someone abandon a helpless creature to the merciless desert? Despite the overwhelming heat and the harsh conditions, Michael couldn't bring himself to drive away. He couldn't simply ignore this. The sight of the puppy, its tiny frame struggling against the odds, stirred something deep within him. It wasn't just an animal. It was a living, breathing soul desperate for help. His heart ached at the thought of leaving her behind, abandoned in this inhospitable place. Without another moment's hesitation, Michael threw open the door of the truck and stepped out. The heat immediately hit him, the desert air thick and suffocating, but he didn't care. He wasn't here for the heat, the dust, or the miles he had left to travel. He was here for this puppy, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The dry ground crunched beneath his boots as he approached the tiny creature. Daisy, despite her exhaustion, managed to lift her head slightly, her eyes locking with his. It was a weak, tired gaze, one filled with confusion and fear, but also with a flicker of hope. Michael's heart broke at the sight of those eyes. There was no way she could have known what he was going to do, but in that moment, he knew he couldn't let her die here. Michael knelt down beside her, feeling the heat radiating off her tiny body. He gently ran his hand along her back, his fingers brushing the matted fur. She didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She was too weak, too tired to fight him off. Instead, she seemed to relax under his touch, her small body surrendering to the warmth of human kindness. "Hey there, little one," Michael whispered, his voice rough from the dry air. "You're going to be okay." He carefully scooped Daisy into his arms, her fragile form almost weightless. As he lifted her, she whimpered weakly, but her eyes never left his. Michael stood, cradling her in his arms, feeling the heat of the desert around him. But for the first time in hours, he felt something different, a sense of purpose, a reason to fight the desert's cruelty. He hurried back to the truck, his heart pounding with urgency. Daisy's breathing was faint, and he knew every second counted. He gently placed her in the passenger seat, the air-conditioned truck a welcome relief for her overheating body. The engine roared to life as Michael slammed his foot on the gas, speeding off into the distance. He had no idea how far he needed to go or if he could make it in time, but he was determined. With every mile that passed, Michael's thoughts raced. Would Daisy survive? Was it too late? The desert had been harsh, unforgiving, but he couldn't stop now. He had to believe there was hope, even in the most hopeless of places. He had to believe that he could save her. The miles stretched out before him, endless and uncertain, but with each passing moment, Michael felt a growing sense of determination. He couldn't undo the cruelty that Daisy had endured, but he could be the one to change her fate. The desert may have been her starting point, but it wouldn't be her end. Michael could feel the heat of Daisy's tiny body pressing against his chest, a suffocating warmth that made his skin feel like it was on fire. Her fur was slick with sweat, and he could feel the quick, shallow breaths she took as she struggled to stay conscious. Her small body trembled in his arms, fragile and weak, like a lifeline dangling in the hands of fate. The desert had not been kind to her. Each minute in its grasp had drained her of her strength, leaving her on the brink of collapse. As Michael held her, his thoughts were a swirl of doubt and urgency. The puppy's survival seemed so uncertain, so fragile. The desert was a merciless force. The heat alone could steal the life from an animal as small and defenseless as Daisy. She had been left to die here, an innocent creature abandoned in a place where death lingered like a shadow, always just a breath away. Yet as he looked down at her, something stirred within him. A strange feeling, a spark of connection that he couldn't explain. Daisy's eyes flickered again, this time more intensely. For a split second, her tiny pupils locked onto his. It was a fleeting moment, but in that instant, Michael felt something powerful pass between them. She was still conscious. She was still fighting. Her will to survive hadn't completely faded. The glimmer in her eyes wasn't one of fear or hopelessness. It was the faintest flicker of hope, as if she was silently begging for a chance, for someone to believe in her, to help her. Michael's chest tightened as he gently cradled her closer, his heart aching with an overwhelming mixture of sympathy and guilt. He didn't know how long she had been out here alone. How many hours had she suffered in the unrelenting heat? How had anyone been capable of leaving her behind? He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the small, fragile life in his arms. It wasn't too late, not yet. As long as she was still breathing, as long as there was any flicker of life left in her, he would fight for her. He quickly checked the truck's glove compartment for a bottle of water, anything to help ease her suffering. When he found it, He unscrewed the cap and gently drizzled a few drops into Daisy's mouth. Her small, dry tongue flicked out to lap at the water, but she was too weak to drink much. Michael's heart sank. He needed to get her to help, and fast. With every second that ticked by, the situation felt more dire. Michael's mind raced, calculating the distance to the nearest town and the best route to take. Every choice seemed like a gamble, and he knew that he couldn't waste any time. He had to save Daisy no matter what it took. The brief moment of connection between them seemed to ignite something inside Michael. It was as if her tiny, flickering hope had been passed on to him, charging him with a responsibility he couldn't ignore. He had been given a chance to make a difference, to rewrite the fate that had been cruelly handed to her. There was no turning back now. As he started the truck, the engine roared to life, and the truck's tires crunched over the hot desert sand as he pushed it forward. Every bump in the road made his stomach churn with dread, but Michael gritted his teeth and focused. Daisy's shallow breaths were a constant reminder of how fragile her life was. He couldn't lose her, not after everything he had witnessed, not after seeing that glimmer of hope in her eyes. As the truck sped down the road, Michael spoke to her softly, though he knew she couldn't understand the words. He simply needed to reassure himself, to reaffirm the promise he had made to her without even saying it aloud. "You're not alone. I'm not leaving you. Not now, not ever." And as Daisy's small body remained nestled in his arms, he held on to the belief that there was a chance. There was always a chance, no matter how slim. He would get her to safety. He would make sure that the desert would not claim her life. Michael's heart hammered in his chest as the truck bounced over the rough desert terrain. His eyes flicked between the road ahead and the passenger seat, where Daisy lay, barely conscious. Her small body, so fragile and frail, seemed to become more and more limp with each passing mile. The faint rise and fall of her chest was the only sign that she was still alive. The heat was unbearable, pressing down on them both as the truck rumbled over the scorched earth. Every moment felt like an eternity, and yet the miles seemed to stretch out longer than ever before. Michael's hands trembled on the steering wheel, his grip tight but not steady. His thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. He kept glancing over at Daisy, hoping that he could see her eyes flutter open, that the spark of life he had felt in her when he first picked her up would return. But Daisy remained still, her tiny body barely moving. The desert, in all its ruthless power, had taken its toll on her. He reached for his phone, desperately hoping to find a signal that could connect him to the nearest animal hospital, but there was nothing. The screen remained blank, mocking him with its silence. No signal, no help. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. His mind raced as he thought of his options. The nearest town was still miles away, and the chances of Daisy surviving the journey seemed slimmer with every second that passed. The sun had been beating down on them for hours, and the brutal heat of the desert was only getting worse. But Michael couldn't give up. He wouldn't give up, not when Daisy was still breathing, not when he was her last hope. He had already seen the faint glimmer of life in her eyes, and that was enough for him to keep pushing forward. He couldn't allow the cruelty of the desert to claim her. He wouldn't let her become another statistic, a nameless victim lost to the sands. He slammed his foot down harder on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in response. The truck surged forward, its tires kicking up clouds of dust behind them. The miles seemed to fly by, but the anxiety in Michael's chest only grew heavier. Every bump in the road jarred his body, but his focus remained sharp. His eyes never left the road, but his thoughts were fixed on Daisy, praying that she would hang on just a little longer. The sun seemed to be sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Michael's mind was clouded with questions and worries. Would he make it in time? What if it was already too late? Every time he glanced at Daisy, it felt like he was holding his breath, waiting for something, a sign, a miracle. But all he saw was the same quiet stillness, the same fragile body lying there as if waiting for the world to turn its back on her. But then just when the darkness of doubt seemed to close in on him, Michael saw it. In the distance, far off on the horizon, there was a faint glow. It was small at first, just a pinprick of light, but as he drew closer, it grew larger. The lights of a town. The first sign of civilization in what felt like an endless sea of sand. Michael's pulse quickened as he realized that they were almost there. He pushed the truck harder, his eyes locked on the glowing lights ahead. Every inch of the journey had felt like a battle against time, a race to save Daisy before it was too late. But now, with the town in sight, there was a flicker of hope that burned brighter than the desert sun. The headlights of his truck cut through the twilight, illuminating the road ahead. He could already imagine the small animal clinic in the town, a place where Daisy could receive the care she so desperately needed. As he neared the edge of the town, Michael's heart rate skyrocketed. The small streets of the town were barely visible in the dimming light, but he knew the clinic had to be close. He had to make it there. He couldn't risk losing her now. His hands tightened on the wheel as he swerved through the empty streets, hoping that someone would be there, that someone would be able to help. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw the familiar sign of a small animal clinic lit up by a single streetlight. It was a humble place, nothing fancy, but it was the hope he had been clinging to for miles. He slammed the brakes, the truck screeching to a stop in front of the clinic. Without wasting another second, Michael jumped out of the truck and rushed to Daisy's side. He grabbed her gently but urgently, cradling her in his arms once more. The door to the clinic swung open, and a nurse rushed out to meet him. "What happened?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. "Please help her," Michael pleaded, his voice shaky. "She's been abandoned in the desert. She's barely hanging on. She needs help now." The nurse didn't hesitate. "Bring her inside. We'll take care of her." Michael followed her into the clinic, his hands still trembling as he laid Daisy on the examination table. The nurse quickly went to work, taking her temperature and checking her vitals. Michael could only stand there, pacing back and forth, unable to do anything but watch. He was so close to losing hope, but there was still a part of him that refused to give up. Minutes felt like hours, but the nurse finally turned to him. "She's alive. It's a miracle, but she's alive." Michael felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. The tension in his chest eased, and a sense of relief washed over him. Daisy wasn't out of the woods yet, but she had a fighting chance now. They would keep her under observation, administer fluids, and give her the care she needed to survive. But for the first time in hours, Michael allowed himself to breathe, allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. As he sat down in the waiting room, exhausted but relieved, he thought about the long road ahead. Daisy still had a long recovery ahead of her, but she had made it through the worst. The desert hadn't claimed her. Michael had refused to let it. And as he sat there, waiting for news, he realized that the bond between him and this tiny, fragile puppy had already been forged. She had been abandoned, left to die, but Michael had saved her. He had given her the chance to live, to feel love, and to be cared for. He had given her a future. In that moment, Michael knew that he had made the right choice. The road had been long and uncertain, but it had led him to this small, simple victory, a victory of kindness, of hope, and of the power of not giving up. As the evening shadows grew longer, and the soft hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights filled the air, Michael sat in the sterile waiting room, his thoughts a swirl of disbelief and wonder. He had been through so much in the past few hours, fighting against the desert's oppressive heat, battling his own doubts, and then racing against time to save a tiny, fragile life. But now, as he sat quietly in the clinic's quiet corner, it seemed almost surreal to think that Daisy, the little puppy he had found lying motionless on the desert floor, was safe. Through the glass window of the treatment room, he could see Daisy, her tiny form resting on a soft bed, her breathing slow but steady. The veterinarian and the nurses had worked tirelessly to stabilize her. There had been no guarantee of success. She was so weak, her body so depleted, but Michael refused to let that be the end of her story. He had watched as the team of doctors connected Daisy to an IV, slowly feeding her the fluids she needed. They had monitored her vital signs, and after hours of care, Daisy's once shallow, irregular breaths had deepened, becoming more rhythmic. The weak, feverish tremors that had racked her small body when Michael first found her had lessened. They'd given her antibiotics to fight any infections, and though it was still early, It seemed that Daisy had made it through the worst. It wasn't just the medical care that had saved her, though. It was the determination and love that had pushed Michael to act when every instinct told him to keep driving, to keep going without looking back. Michael's heart had broken when he saw the frail puppy lying in the sand, and something in him had refused to leave her behind. Something deep inside had compelled him to stop and make that life-altering decision to rescue her, even when he didn't know if it was possible. Michael shifted in his chair, running a hand over his face, the exhaustion of the past few hours catching up to him. His eyes drifted back to Daisy. He could see her ears twitching slightly in her sleep, and a small, faint rise and fall of her chest as the medication took hold. His heart swelled with emotion. It had been a long, desperate journey, but it was worth every second, every ounce of effort. He thought back to the moment he had found Daisy. It felt like it had happened so long ago. Yet the memory was still fresh in his mind. The small, abandoned puppy lying in the sand. Her eyes barely open, her tiny body too weak to move. Michael had been through plenty of long hauls on the road, but this moment had stayed with him, imprinted on his heart. The memory of that look in Daisy's eyes when he first lifted her in his arms haunted him. It wasn't just fear that he saw. There was a flicker of hope, a spark of life that hadn't quite gone out. In that brief, fleeting moment, Daisy had communicated with him without words, and Michael knew that he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't leave her to die in the desert, not on his watch. And now, as he sat there looking at Daisy's quiet form, he realized something deeper. This experience had changed him. It was so much more than rescuing a puppy. It was about the bond that had formed between them. It was about the human capacity for compassion and the profound impact that a single act of kindness could have on someone else's life. As the minutes passed, Michael allowed his mind to wander. He had lived a solitary life for a long time, traveling the roads, meeting strangers along the way, but never truly connecting. The nature of his job meant he was always on the move, rarely staying in one place long enough to form any lasting relationships. But as he sat there in that quiet clinic, with Daisy's life hanging in the balance, something inside him had shifted. He had found something he didn't even realize he was missing. And then, just as the quiet in the room settled, there came a faint sound, an unmistakable sound. Michael's eyes widened as he leaned forward, his heart racing. It was a soft little sound, a sound that he had almost thought was impossible to hear at this moment. Daisy's tail. It was wagging. It was weak, barely a twitch, but it was enough. Enough to make Michael's breath catch in his throat. He hadn't expected it so soon. He hadn't expected any sign of recovery this quickly. But here it was, a sign that the little puppy who had been abandoned in the desert was fighting back. Daisy's tail wagged again, a little more vigorously this time, and Michael couldn't contain the smile that spread across his face. The bond between them had been cemented in that moment. This little, fragile creature was still fighting, still clinging to life, and it was Michael who had given her that chance. He had made the choice to act, to intervene when it seemed like all hope was lost. And now, Daisy was telling him that she was still here, still with him, still alive. The nurse who had been tending to Daisy stepped into the room, a smile on her face. "She's showing signs of improvement," she said softly. "Her temperature's normalizing and her heart rate is stable. She's a fighter." Michael felt a rush of relief flood over him, and he let out a long breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. He nodded, his eyes never leaving Daisy. "She's incredible," he murmured, more to himself than to the nurse. "She really is." The nurse placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. "You're the one who saved her," she said with a soft smile. "It was your kindness, your determination that made all the difference. She's alive because of you." Michael felt the weight of her words sink in. It wasn't just that he had saved a life. He had made a profound impact on this puppy's world, and in turn, it had impacted his own. The bond between them wasn't just physical, it was emotional, rooted in something far deeper than mere rescue. It was about love. It was about the deep, inexplicable connection between humans and animals. It was about the power of compassion, of making a difference when it seems like there's no hope left. As Daisy began to stir slightly, Michael leaned closer, his heart swelling with emotion. The small puppy's eyes fluttered open, and she blinked, her gaze locking onto his with that same glimmer of recognition he had seen earlier in the desert. This time, however, the look was filled with gratitude, as though she knew that her life had been forever changed by the stranger who had saved her. A single tear slipped down Michael's cheek. It wasn't just a tear of relief or joy. It was a tear of realization. Sometimes the most unexpected acts of kindness change the world. Sometimes the smallest, most fragile lives can have the biggest impact on the people around them. Michael had saved Daisy, but in doing so, he had saved something within himself too. The nurse stepped back quietly, leaving Michael and Daisy alone. The small puppy's tail wagged once more, this time a little more steadily, as if she were thanking him in the only way she knew how. Michael reached down and gently stroked her head, his fingers brushing against the soft fur he had first touched in the desert, so many miles away. "I won't let you down, Daisy," Michael whispered. "You're safe now. You'll never be alone again." In that moment, Michael understood what it meant to truly make a difference. He had saved Daisy from the harsh desert, yes, but Daisy had also saved him, giving him a sense of purpose, a sense of connection that had been missing from his life for so long. It wasn't just about rescuing an animal. It was about finding something deeper within himself, something he hadn't known he needed until now. As Daisy's breathing steadied and the last of the tension in Michael's chest began to dissipate, he realized that their journey together had only just begun. He had saved her life, but in return she had given him something priceless, a bond that would last a lifetime. Sometimes the most unexpected acts of kindness can change everything. And for Michael, this was the moment he had truly found his place in the world, a place where love, hope, and compassion guided him forward, one paw at a time. As Michael sat there, watching Daisy's steady recovery, he couldn't help but feel that their story was just beginning. The bond they had formed in such a short time was something extraordinary, and Michael knew that the love they shared would last a lifetime. If Daisy's journey touched your heart, just as it did his, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us all of the power of kindness and the incredible bond between humans and animals.